And welcome to the Rob Kall Bottom Up Show, sponsored by OpEdNews.com. My guest for this show is David Cobb. He's the 2004 Green Party presidential candidate, the campaign manager for Jill Stein's Green Party 2016 presidential candidacy, and the co-founder of Move to Amend. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be actually back with you. This is the first time I've been on this particular show, but you and I actually met a few years ago.
Yes, we did. We met at the public banking conference, and I heard you speak, and I invited you to be on the show then, and then I never really followed up. So I'm really glad we made this happen now, because you're doing some really incredible work. Tell us about the work you do.
Well, Rob, thanks for that sort of open-ended question. I'll tell you, the work that I do for the last 25 years has been my efforts to make the promise of democracy a reality. You see, Rob, I'll be very blunt. I can still get weepy-eyed about thinking about the concept that the United States of America stands for liberty, justice, and democracy. I can get really excited about the concept of limited government that is limited to the functions that it's supposed to serve, but that it actually serves the functions properly. The idea that we, the people, collectively make the decisions about how our society will be organized, but the one thing that we never allow government to do in this society is to offend or restrict or otherwise trample on the individual civil liberties of any person in this country. I can get so excited about that, and I can still remember as a young boy how proud I was to be an American because I was told that that's what my country stood for. And now today, I'm sort of an angry older man because I am pissed off that the country that I was told that I lived in is actually a lie. We've never had a functioning democracy in the United States of America. From the founding of this country, in its genocidal policies against the indigenous people, to the enslavement of Africans, to a U.S. Constitution that is premised around protecting the property rights of the wealthy elite rather than the human rights of ordinary human beings. I guess the point is, Rob, I consider myself a democracy activist, and everything I've done over the last 25 years is my effort to achieve genuine democracy in the United States of America.
And you've done it through the Green Party. Now, you told one of our writers in an interview with Joan Brunwasser that the Democratic Party presidential primary is where progressive politics goes to die because all the energy, enthusiasm, and money is ultimately absorbed into the Wall Street funded and corporate controlled Democratic Party machine. Talk more about that.
Well, Rob, thanks for that. And I'll actually ease into the context of that comment. You see, it comes out of lived experience because when I was right out of high school, I worked in construction for a couple of years and I realized then actually that the construction trades would make a young man old much faster than should be done. So I went into college and that couple of years of having worked really tempered my entire educational experience. I mean, I was a very motivated student, right? And bluntly, I grew up in poverty as a young boy in rural Texas. So I had a lived experience around an economic system and understanding that it didn't work and wasn't fair, but I still believed in the idea of the United States of America. It was in college that I began to learn that so much of the U.S. history I had been taught was actually propaganda. It's not until college that they actually, at least in my generation, were we ever actually exposed to really the context of empire and the context of U.S. foreign policy and how it's actually worked and the long legacy of white supremacy and what that sort of means. So I guess what I'm getting at is I really had a kind of awakening at the university level, and it really happened my freshman year. Again, I'm about 20, so but that 2 years meant a lot. But I remember seeing a big banner that said "End Apartheid Now," and it was during the anti-apartheid movement. And I remember thinking, oh, I'd like to end apartheid. I know what that is. That's terrible. I'm glad that there's something. And then I also thought, oh, wow, look, underneath the banner at a table, an activist. How exotic. You know, I had never actually seen an activist coming from rural Texas, right? It's like, oh my gosh, there's somebody doing something like that. I was so excited. I walked over, I began a conversation. Rob, within 5 minutes, I'm in an argument with this guy, and not an ugly yelling at each other argument, but an intellectual debate, right? Because that guy had the audacity to tell me that the United States government supported apartheid. And I argued with him, no, apartheid is bad. We're the United States of America. Where'd you go to school, fool? Don't you know better? Don't you know anything? And of course, I see you smiling because you know, as I know, I was arguing not just a foolish position, a completely objectively inaccurate one. But I didn't know it was
a cool position for the average uninformed American.
Exactly, because in our education system, especially through elementary and high school, what's known as K through 12, it's mostly propaganda. Rah, rah.
I was going to say education system or propaganda indoctrination system.
Exactly. And so, Rob, the reality is what I remember about that were two things. One, how he talked to me. He never talked down to me. This guy never insulted me. But I also remember what he said, because somewhere along the way, he said, look, you clearly have an opinion that I think is wrong. I've got all this material on my table for you to look at. So you're welcome to take it, but I've got a challenge for you. The library is just 100 feet away. Why don't you go do some independent research, see what you learn, and then come back and we can have another conversation. And I'll tell you, Rob, that was a very powerful thing to do because he treated me with respect. He also challenged me, and he didn't just say, look at the stuff I'm trying to feed you. I encourage you to go and do some independent research and then come back.
So now, you disagreed with Michael Moore's book, Stupid White Men.
Listen, it's really interesting, right? Because this guy, he was a black guy, but he treated me as a human being. He actually treated me as somebody who was uninformed, but rather than try to just heap, like say, no, you're wrong, he was trying to find our common ground. And then when he realized we had such diverging opinions on objective facts, he sent me to look at other facts from an outside source. As a journalist, I know that you can appreciate that. Here's the point. Within a year, by the end of my freshman year, I was actually sitting at the table on the other side. I was a member of the anti-apartheid movement. And that began really my education about how U.S. foreign policy worked. And from there, and this is all a big lead up to answer your question, from there, it became very easy. I kind of fell into being a student organizer for the Jesse Jackson campaign in 1984 as a student activist at the University of Houston. I then went on and worked on his campaign in 1988. And in fact, it was a very exciting experience to work on Jesse Jackson's campaign. I had the privilege of meeting Reverend Jackson back in 2004 during the recount of Ohio. And I remember telling him, Reverend, you ruined me for politics. You see, my first presidential campaign, we were talking about restructuring society, fundamental fairness. We were talking about single-payer health care. We were talking about a blue-green alliance where you brought together organized labor and you brought together environmentalists. We were talking about the Rainbow Coalition across both race and gender. I mean, I said, I thought elections were always going to be like that. I thought we would always be having real conversations about the things that really mattered. So I had a difficult time because I want to be clear. I worked on Jesse Jackson's campaign in the Democratic Party in 84 and 88. We had the better ideas. We had the better infrastructure. We had the most volunteers. In every way, we were winning, but the corporate money crushed us. And frankly, I also worked on Jerry Brown's campaign in 1992 and saw the same experience. I saw the same experience in 1996 as well. And so at the end of that process, that's when I realized, oh my God, the system is rigged. The leadership of the Democratic Party would rather lose to Republicans than ever allow genuine progressives to actually have the machinery and apparatus known as the Democratic Party. So
you're saying that the leadership would rather lose. Get into that a little bit, because that is insanity. It's disgusting. It's despicable.
And it's true. And let me make the case. Let me make the case. It is disgusting and despicable and insanity. Here is an example. I've got several anecdotes like this. In the 2000 election, when I was managing Ralph Nader's campaign in the state of Texas, this was the first real explosion of Green Party activity in this country, right? And in that race, in the last 2 weeks, the Democratic National Committee made an ad buy of over $1 million and placed those ads in California. And let me tell you what those ads said. It was Ralph Nader visually, and then you heard Ralph talking, and then Ralph's audio goes down. You still see him, but an anonymous voice begins to opine what a tragedy it is that Ralph is throwing away his legacy, because what is looming on the horizon is the horror of George Bush. And then this litany of abuses of George Bush goes on, and digitally, and this is in 2000, so it cost a fair amount of money to even produce this thing then. Digitally, Ralph transmogrifies into George Bush. And the last thing, and it appears on the screen as well, a vote for Nader is a vote for Bush. Now, Rob, that approach, I think, is not a very intelligent way to make a case. Lesser evilism, we can talk about that. But I'm going deeper with you and your audience. Even if you agree that that's true, which I do not, but even if you think that that's true, why did the Democratic National Committee spend $1 million placing that ad in the state of California?
Because they were scared.
Because they were scared. But what were they scared of? Were they scared that Ralph Nader was going to win the presidency? Was he scared that he was going to beat Al Gore in the state of California? No, because polling data shows that Al Gore was winning California by almost 20 percentage points in 2000. They weren't worried about the Electoral College votes in California. What were they worried about? Rob, they were worried that the Green Party might get 5% of the vote and actually launch a genuine grassroots, completely people-driven political party that challenged.
What does it mean if the Green Party gets 5% of the vote?
If the Green Party had gotten 5% in that vote, or if you get 5% in any presidential election, the Federal Election Fund provision provides access to millions of dollars for the next campaign.
That applies. Right? So if the Green Party gets 5% in any state,
unless they change the law, and that's actually 5% aggregate. But here's my point: they knew that means nationally, right? Remember, as you correctly have sort of touched upon, we're actually running 50 different state elections, right? And it's actually the Electoral College that elects the president. But the FEC matching funds provision is if you get 5% of the national vote, you will get access to millions of dollars. And the Democratic National Committee knew that if Ralph was going to get 5%, he got about 3%, right? But they knew that they had to suppress the California vote, especially because all the other polls would have closed by the time California really was coming online. And we in the Green Party were already running a grassroots campaign that said, if you're scared of George Bush and you're afraid that Al Gore might not win, wait until don't vote early, vote later in the late afternoon or early evening when the election is already called, and you can cast your vote with confidence if you like the Green Party but you're scared of Bush. They knew that, and so ran a $1 million ad campaign. And here's my kicker, Rob. What if the Democratic National Committee had spent $1 million in Florida
Yeah.
or in Tennessee, Al Gore's own home state? The reality is they had polling data. They knew how close this election was. There is an objective anecdote that I say we can conclude that the leadership of the Democratic Party would rather have risked George Bush being elected in 2000 than they were interested. They were more interested in crushing the Green Party in our infancy than allowing and beating George Bush. And I've got lots of other anecdotes like that.
Well, what do you have to say? I mean, a lot of people say that Nader gave the election to Bush. What's your response to that?
Look, first of all, you have to remember this, that it wasn't Nader's election to give. Ralph did not steal anybody's votes because only the voter owns their votes. You have to earn votes. And if the Democratic nominee in 2000 had run a genuine progressive populist campaign, they would have won that election. Just like in 2016, if the Democratic nominee had run a progressive populist campaign, they would have beat Donald Trump. And bluntly, if Bernie Sanders had been the Democratic Party's nominee, I know, you know, polling data knows, 150 million Americans know, without doubt, Bernie Sanders would be president of the United States today. So I want to really go deep here. Number one, it's a voter's right to choose to cast their vote how they see fit. It's up to the candidates to earn their vote. Deeper still, Rob, as an unavowed progressive, as somebody who wants to restructure society, as a nonviolent revolutionary, I tell you this. Let's look at American history and look at what it took so-called alternative political parties, or third parties, but I like to call them alternative political parties. What did it take alternative political parties to champion at the ballot box? Here's that list. The abolition of slavery, women getting the right to vote, the creation of the Social Security Administration, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation laws, pure food and drug laws, ending child labor, the direct election of the United States Senate, the 40-hour work week. For goodness sakes, Rob, the entire fabric of what you and I and your viewers and listeners understand to be the bare damn minimum for a just and compassionate society, that fabric was woven together thread by thread, issue by issue, strand by strand, by people who did their work when they were called dangerous un-Americans, people who did their work when they were called naive and unrealistic, and people who did their work when they were called spoilers. So if Americans of this generation want to live in a world, not just talk about it, not just dream it, but literally live in a world that will go head to head and transform and the billionaire class economy, if we want to actually have a living wage, if we want to wean ourselves off of coal and oil and on to sustainable alternative energy sources, if we want to end forever war as foreign policy and the wars for oil, if we want a genuine Green New Deal, we've got to actually have the courage to vote for that. So this notion of the role that alternative political parties play is actually objective and historical. And the last thing I really want to underscore here is that the history of alternative political parties in this country is actually only half of the history. Because to make the systemic transformational change I want to be part of and you want to be part of requires broadly two things. Now, there's a lot of details here, but it requires broadly two things. One, you have to have a mass movement, right? A mass movement that is broad, deep, bottom up. And I know you've got some things to say about that. It's got to be broad.
I'd like you to throw in whenever you can, your thoughts on that.
Sure. So, and I did that especially so that we could talk about that because I'm eager to look at your book. Broad, deep, bottom up, conscious, educated, and militant, meaning willing to disrupt the current system. But even if you have social movements willing to do all that, you also need step two, or the second part of the equation, an electoral arm running on a program and platform that actually disrupt the established parties of the day. So a mass movement and an electoral arm. And today, look at what we've got. Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, the global climate justice movement, a resurgent peace movement, an anti-war movement. All the recipes for a mass movement are coming together. And you're also seeing the beginnings of electoral formations that we've never seen before. And let's be clear, even within the Democratic Party, what we're seeing is our revolution, brand new Congress, Justice Democrats. Nick Brannis called for Bernie to form his own third party, Draft Bernie. You've got the Green Party. You've got Socialist Alternative. Like, literally, I could go on. I'm tracking about a dozen serious formations that are actually you and I have never seen before, right? And something profound is happening right now, right? So I am very clear, Rob. I am committed to working with progressives, whether they are Greens, Progressive Democrats, peace and freedom, socialists. It doesn't matter. Now, I believe that it is impossible to actually take over the Democratic Party. But hey, I've been wrong before. If I'm wrong and people actually take over the Democratic Party and it becomes an agent of transformational change, I will be the first to say I was wrong. Thank you. Let's work together in that electoral framework, right?
Frankly, I started a Facebook group called Take Back the Democratic Party in America, but I'm not real hopeful.
Well, that's the point, right? Even the people who are doing it that I talk to, smart people like you, don't believe it'll work, but they're still trying. And here's my point, Rob. I know that you, because I've read your material, I know who you are, right? I did, like when I met you at the public banking, you told me about OpEdNews. I said, oh, this is interesting. I looked at OpEdNews, and then I did a level of research on you because I do my research, right? I learned about a little bit about your own bio, and I said, okay, so I'm dealing with a genuine progressive. So when somebody like you says, I'm trying to, quote, take back the Democratic Party, I say two things to myself. One, I say, he's likely not to succeed. And he's somebody that I share principles and values with. Rob, our disagreement around the Democratic Party is a tactical one, not a strategic one, right? It's really important to get the difference between strategies and tactics. And it's definitely, we share goals, right?
What is that difference? Get into that.
Yeah, so a tactical, so goals, strategies, and tactics. We clearly share a goal, right? Our goal is a transformed society that is peaceful, just, democratic, and ecologically sustainable. Fair enough? I mean, we could, all right, so we share our goals, our core principles and values of peace, justice, democracy, and ecology, right? So now we're getting into strategy. So the strategy is how to achieve that. Here's the interesting thing. When I was talking about the two-pronged strategy of a mass movement and electoral arm, that's a strategic conversation. I watched you nod your head yes, right? So we actually share a basic strategy.
Okay.
Our tactic is different. Some people's tactics of mass movements might be different. The tactics of how to engage electoral politics could be different. So I don't view you as my enemy. I view you as an ally. I view you as a friend who is making a tactically different decision. And frankly, one of us are likely to be right. And listen, the thing is, and here's a little joke for you, Rob. I'm in the Green Party because I think that's the electoral arm where it should be. You're in the Democratic Party.
No, I'm not.
You yourself said, I don't,
No,
well, take back the Democratic Party. Take back the Democratic Party. So I sort of say this, Rob, when you become a Green, and you will, I won't say I told you so.
You know, you can't become a Green in Pennsylvania.
Oh, right. No, that's a good point, right? So let's actually parse that even further.
Matter of fact, this is crazy, but I was an independent and voted for Jill Stein in 2012 and 2016, but I changed back to be a Democrat so I could vote for Bernie in the primary. I went online to try to change back to independent. I couldn't figure out how to do it. I design websites. I know how to figure things out. I could not figure out how. I'm still stuck as a Democrat, and I don't want to be.
Right.
I just haven't had the time to go back and wrestle with this stupid state website, but they make it that hard. And in Pennsylvania, it is particularly disgusting and despicable and horrible how hard they make it for a Green Party candidate to get on the ballot. It's crazy. It's one of the worst in the country.
It is crazy. And now let me go deeper here, right? Because there are 50 elections, 50 different ballot access requirements, 50 different debate processes, 50 different. So it's incredibly Byzantine and complex. Now let's actually be very clear. You see, the Green Party is actually growing. We're getting larger, stronger, and better organized every day. If you look at party registration, number of people running as Greens, people participating in the Green Party. And we're doing that in a system that's not just designed to prevent our success. This system is literally designed to prevent our existence. Look at what I'm talking about. Ballot access requirements that are more draconian. I mentioned 2000 and 2004. Remember the Iraq War? And remember that when they had their first election, it was easier to get on the ballot as a Green in Iraq than it was in the United States. Think about that for a minute, right? And it's not just access to the ballot. It's also access to the debate stage, because the debates, which are the single most important place where the voter actually gets information and hears from candidates, Greens are restricted and not allowed to participate. And the Commission on Presidential Debates is particularly galling because that's a sham. Rob, the Commission on Presidential Debates that runs it, that sounds very official, doesn't it? Right? The Commission on Presidential Debates is actually a private corporation. And who owns it? The Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee appoint the leaders of the Commission on Presidential Debates, and they create a process and a moving targets that is guaranteed to ensure that alternative parties are never heard. But wait, you say, that's not true. I remember the League of Women Voters. And I say, that's Rob, because you and I are the generation when the League of Women Voters started the presidential debates in modern America. Do you know why the Commission on Presidential Debates was formed? Because the League of Women Voters had the audacity to invite Ross Perot onto the debate stage, and he galvanized the American people and basically shifted the consciousness. And whether you liked Ross Perot or not, let's at least acknowledge this. Before his involvement, both the Democrats and the Republicans were playing the balanced budget like a political football. Democrats accused it of being the Republicans' fault for not being willing to raise taxes. Republicans blamed the Democrats for spending issues, and they just blamed each other, ha, ha, ha. Ross Perot came out with his little simple flip charts, right, and $1 million to be able to go directly to ads, and he began surging in the polls. The League of Women Voters invited him in. He went bonkers. He ended up he dropped out, then got back in, and even after doing that, got over 8% of the vote, by the way, qualifying the Reform Party candidate the next year for millions of dollars. But the point is this, Rob, the Commission on Presidential Debates said never again. They saw what happened. They literally created a process to steal the national debate process away from the league. And that's just ballot access. We also now have to talk, so that's ballot access and that's access to the debates. Also, there's a corporate media system that is literally preventing any information from either the Libertarian Party or the Green Party from ever leaking out. The Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, a fantastic organization, conducted a poll over the month of, I think it was September or maybe September, to ask how many times were the four major and there was only four major presidential candidates listed here are discussed on broadcast news. These may not be precise numbers, but I don't have them exactly off my head, but these are pretty much accurate. Donald Trump was covered for a total of 3,000 hours cumulative, or the average for the month. Hillary Clinton only got 2,400. Now that's a huge difference right there, right? Like, and that actually helps us to explain how the corporate media covering and chasing Donald Trump, admittedly calling him a buffoon, but just giving him that much airtime, really flipped the script. You know who came in third? I don't think you'd guess. Guess who came in third?
Johnson.
Evan McMullin. Remember him?
No.
Evan McMullin was the Republican who was disgusted by Donald Trump.
Utah, something like that.
Utah. Yes. Yeah. Here's the thing. He came in third. Donald Trump got 3,000 minutes. Hillary Clinton got 2,400 minutes. Guess Evan McMullin got 11 minutes. Gary Johnson came in fourth with 3 minutes. Jill Stein averaged 16 seconds because there was one broadcast story that included her. So look at those numbers, right? And what you see is evidence of a consistent effort on the part of the mass media to not cover it. Now, how can it be, Rob, that the third parties are so dangerous and yet they're never covered by the mass media? Again, it's manufactured consent. If you actually had the mass media or corporate media actually covering both Gary Johnson and Jill Stein, I think you would see a completely different election result anyway. And I haven't even gone deeper. So we've got restrictions from the ballot. We've got restrictions from the debate stage. We've got a corporate media that is literally mocking or ridiculing alternative parties if they ever cover us at all. And you've got an election system that's forcing most voters to feel like they have to hold their nose and pull a lever against, because they're not voting for anybody. They're actually voting against the candidate that they hate, right? I mean, if you're holding your nose to cast a vote, at least acknowledge the stench. And the stench is a voting system that's forcing you to do that. Do you know that exit polling data in this election showed something remarkable? For the first time in U.S. history, more voters were voting against the opposing major party's candidate than for the one that they actually liked, right? That's never happened before, Rob.
Surprising. That's what I've been saying. That when I think about Trump voters, I don't hold it against them for voting for Trump because they were most likely more voting against Hillary than for Trump. Now,
the polls show that you were correct, by the way.
The people who are still supporting Trump, they're out of their minds, but
right. No, I'm with you. I mean, Donald Trump is a neo-fascist. He is the anathema of everything that I hold dear. So in no way, shape, or form am I a Trump voter or a Trump supporter. And I will equally say Hillary Clinton is a neoliberal. She is the reason that Donald Trump exists because of her, of Bill Clinton, of the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Leadership Council that are literally corporatists themselves. And remember that neoliberal just means the concept of privatizing the public, right? So that's actually what they've been doing since the 1970s. I regret to say Jimmy Carter and his deregulation of the trucking industry and the banking industry and the airline industry really began neoliberalism. It certainly exacerbated under Ronald Reagan, but it really spiked under Bill Clinton. 8 years of Bill Clinton was a disaster for progressives and for this country. He balanced He balanced the budget on the backs of the working poor and people of color in this country, right? So again, all I'm getting at, this big picture, Rob, is the electoral system of this country is profoundly undemocratic. Because I could also talk about the racist criminal justice system that is used to disenfranchise disproportionately people of color. I could also talk about the systems of interstate cross-check, which are used to prevent poor people and people of color and purge them from the rolls. I could talk about the state process that you started with that really sort of traps people into political parties. Do you know that the Democratic Party is actually losing membership right now? Nick Branna has a great analysis where he looks at actual objective numbers and sort of walks through to show that even with Bernie working his keister off, trying to actually keep people in the Democratic Party and bring people in, it's actually not working.
Where are they going?
Independent. They're going independent right now. Now, the Green Party is growing, but not nearly at the rate that the Democratic Party is hemorrhaging people. They're not going Republican. They're going independent. That's
How about the Republican Party? What's happening with them?
Stable. They're not growing. They're not losing members. But the fastest growing group are independents by far.
So you mentioned that there are some successes for the Green Party. How would you demonstrate them?
Objectively, I really appreciate as a journalist you pushing that, right? And that's a good question. And I would say objective numbers. First, we're able to get on more ballots, right? I mean, as horrific as that is a way to describe success, you have to, because the system prevents us from even being able to run candidates.
Breaking down barriers.
Breaking down barriers, exactly. The second thing is that when we've broken down those barriers, we've actually been able to retain more ballot lines. In addition, more candidates have run. And here is the kicker. At the local and county level, we're electing more people. There are right now about 150 elected Greens across this country. And Rob, get this. We as Greens win about 30% of the local and county races that we run in. So when people say, oh, you Greens, you only show up in presidential election years, that's objectively not true. We actually run more candidates in the spring and the off-year elections. We win local elections, and we win lots of them, about a third of them that we enter into. So the Greens are already running at the local level. We're winning at the local level. And when we win at the local level, we're helping to make people's lives better. The sanctuary city movement, I'm not saying Greens are the only ones doing it, but Greens are vocal advocates. Elected city council members are vocal advocates across this country. And one of the things that I'm really excited to tell you is, again, because so much of my work was for the Green Party nationally before I did move to amend was at the national level. In Arcata, California, in Humboldt County, where I now live, remember the Patriot Act and how horrible that was? It was actually started by Bill Clinton in the Anti-Terrorism Act of 1996. George Bush made it a lot worse, to be sure, but he didn't create it out of a whole cloth. But get this, when those resolutions against the Patriot Act were happening all across the country, which are great, Arcata, California, thanks to Green Party leadership, did something that no other city did. You know what they did? What? They passed a binding local ordinance that said, in this community, we find the following three provisions of the Patriot Act to be unconstitutional violations of the civil liberties of the citizens of Arcata, and we instruct our police department, our city librarian, and our county clerk to refuse to comply with any federal government request in these following three manners. They literally wrote an ordinance that was challenging the federal government's ability to actually do certain of the most egregious things.
They were Green Party people?
Yes.
Okay. What about now? Where would you say, who are the most influential Green Party elected officials?
Well, I got to say, Gail McLaughlin in Richmond, California, as part of the Richmond Progressive Alliance, fighting Chevron refinery there in Richmond, California, is probably the biggest and most famous of elected Greens. But there's also really some interesting people like Lena Buggs in Minneapolis, Minnesota, on her local soil and water district, where she's leading entire groups of people to come in and do sample water testing, right? So, and she's doing it by providing just minuscule amounts of money available to school districts so that children are actually learning to be scientists, learning the importance of water quality, and actually doing tests on the soil and water. And again, this is what can happen. When that happens, there was another example. Caitlin Saposi-Belknap, who was on the water board in Humboldt County, California, when there was an effort to privatize the water system, actually led a public process to say, look, we need to get the public involved, and did not just hearings where, okay, we the experts are going to tell the public, but they actually led very highly participatory processes all across the county to explain to the voters of Humboldt County what California water law is, what NAFTA means for if you ever privatize water, and what it means if you allow an international corporation, which was trying to buy water rights, what that would actually mean, what the challenges were for both salmon and industrial application and private use of the water. I'm just pointing out, Rob, that I could go on and on about examples of little things that actually make up something big, an idea that actually our government is our government, and that we, the people, could actually be engaged not merely as voters, but actually more active participants in that overall process. And that's the reason I'm a democracy activist. That's the reason that I believe in the Green Party. I engage in frontline struggles and support frontline struggles and activism, trying to defend against the worst corporate harms and abuses. And I engage in electoral processes as a democracy activist, which is why I know that we're running out of time. So I want to make sure to cover the Democracy Convention that's coming up August 2 through 6 in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
That's great.
www.democracyconvention.org. Rob, it's very exciting because this is not just one convention. It's actually a series of conferences. So we have a Peace and Democracy Conference, a Racial Justice and Democracy Conference, a Law and Democracy Conference, a Media and Democracy Conference, all of which are interdisciplinary. Some of them will actually be cross-pollinating with one another, where we talk about peace and media and democracy, maybe something that you might be interested in thinking about, like cross-pollinating across conferences.
So how would that work? What does that mean?
Well, what that means is, imagine there are different conferences, but sometimes conferences come together and say, let's actually offer something at the same time. But when you do that, then you have to say, well, we want to talk about economic justice and media at the same time, right? How does that intersperse? And it may be that your book, Bottom Up, might actually be a place where that could be explored, right?
And I'm going to be speaking at the conference.
And that's right. This is I sort of use that as the setup, Rob, to say, if you're watching this video, or if you're listening to us on PRN, then you're already a fan of Rob's work. Well, Rob will be a presenter at the Democracy Convention. We haven't actually figured out exactly what it'll be, but we know it'll be sometime in the heart of the convention. And we know we've already got confirmation of Jill Stein and Chase Iron Eyes from Standing Rock coming. We have a probable from Shama Sawant. We have invitations out to Dr. Cornell West, and also I believe an invitation has also gone out to Alicia Garza, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. So there's something very exciting going on. We expect between 600 to 1,000 people altogether coming. So it should be very exciting. And I want to encourage people to go to that website, www.democracyconvention.org, and join us. And if you can't join us there, at least sign up, because we're probably going to do a series of readings in advance, and make that available on the website. And then we'll have a follow-up report from that.
Will
and
there
I
be a
know,
live stream?
yes, and we'll be live streaming it. There you go. That's exactly why I was saying to sign up, because if you just sign up, we will be live streaming the plenaries. We'll be live streaming some of the actual workshop sessions. Again, presenters will decide whether they want it to be live streamed or not, but we'll make that available to you. So we fully expect at least 10,000 people to be participating between the local folks that are there on the ground and our live stream audience, based on how successful our live streams have been to date.
And it's a very inexpensive conference to attend, and there's university housing that you can stay at inexpensively. Right?
Very inexpensive. And so we really, and it's on a sliding scale. So Rob, we really do, look, I'm a serious nonviolent revolutionary. I am a revolutionary because I believe we need to restructure our society. I'm a nonviolent revolutionary. That's important. I do not believe in violence as an affirmative political tool. But I absolutely am committed to doing everything possible to bring this information to as many people as possible. And the last thing I do want to say is I hope you can come to the Democracy Convention. I hope you also will come. And if you want to hear more about the recount, which we didn't really get a chance to go into, the time flew by. But you can go to
time.
Okay, so let me just hit on the recount very quickly. One, if you want to go deeper on any of it, go to the website Jill2016.com, and I hopefully, Rob, you'll embed that somewhere, Jill2016.com, and you can see the reports that we've done. What we know is this: we cannot be confident in the reported results of these election results because of the electronic voting machines and black box voting, especially in Pennsylvania.
And OpEdNews has literally published thousands of articles showing just why you can't trust the vote. I mean, if you just look at the election that just happened in Georgia, all the votes were cast on electronic machines that are unable to do a legitimate, reliable recount. 100%.
And you cannot audit it. It cannot be audited or recounted. And again, Rob, look, I'm not being sycophantic to you, but I do want to lift up OpEdNews on the issue. Like, there are plenty of progressive outlets that cover a lot of important issues, and y'all cover a lot of important issues, and you do it well. But I do want to lift up OpEdNews as one of the consistent places where election integrity is actually covered. Most other progressive outlets, frankly, only cover it sporadically, if at all. And I think it's because they're scared of what it implies. They're scared of actually peeling behind the curtain and recognizing that we've literally privatized, thanks to neoliberalism, we've literally privatized the system of how our votes are counted.
You know, I wouldn't even mind if the counting of the votes was privatized, if it was replicable.
Right, fair enough. And that's interesting, right? Because there are many
people privatization, and I think that it has a lot of problems. But if you're going to privatize, you got to set some basic rules. And boy, what we've got right now is a disaster and a farce.
It is a farce, and that's the thing. So rather than quibble about whether it's good or not to privatize the elections, because I disagree with you, but let's actually focus on where we agree. At the damn minimum, you've got to have a system where you can validate the reported results.
Wait,
you have a system of auditing and recounting, and you can't do that with the current electronic voting system.
And we don't disagree. I would rather see elections all government handled.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So because that's the reason for me, because this is a profoundly public process, right? Elections are where we actually are supposed to be voting on the representatives that are to represent us in this form of government that we have. For goodness sakes, Rob, this is the infrastructure of our entire society. It's got to be public if we're actually going to have any confidence. So again, the Jill2016.com website will show you what we discovered in our efforts to recount Pennsylvania and New Mexico and Michigan.
What's the summary?
The summary is this: we can have no confidence in those reported results. Number two, the racist nature of how those three states conducted their elections and utilized interstate cross-check was horrific. And there was no doubt that people of color's votes, they were both not allowed to vote at statistically significant rates, and their votes were not counted at statistically significant rates differently than white voters. And
this is something that Greg Palast has really well documented.
The best democracy money can buy goes into this hook, line, and sinker. What we're saying is Greg Palast, who wrote that even before the election, so you can read The Best Election Money Can Buy or watch the amazing documentary that came out of that. And you can go to the website, jill2016.com, for objective data that actually corroborates everything that Greg Palast predicted was going to happen is corroborated by those recounts.
Now, I'd also like to talk about Move to Amend. You were involved in founding it and running it for a while. I don't think you're currently active with it, but straighten me out on that and tell us about Move to Amend.
Sure. So I was a co-founder and happy for that. I never, quote, ran it. There was actually a group of us that actually did that. And so I want to really lift up the collective process that it was. And also my colleague, Caitlin Saposi-Belknap, who was serving as the director. She and I sort of together were the two main people, quote, running it at the national level. But there were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who were working on it as well. So I do want to lift up the collective process it was. But remember that Move to Amend began 6 months before the Citizens United case.
Well, what is Move to Amend? Why don't you start off by giving a brief description of what it is?
So, Move to Amend is a grassroots effort calling for a constitutional amendment to abolish in its entirety the illegitimate, court-created, made-up, ridiculous idea, actually two ideas. One, that a corporation is a person with constitutional rights the way human beings are. And two, the ridiculous idea that money is the functional equivalent of political speech. Because taken together, these two ideas have stolen our sacred right to govern ourselves. Because if a corporation is a person with constitutional rights, it means corporate lawyers can and do go into court to overturn any law that we, the people, work our keisters off to pass. Environmental protection laws, worker safety laws, public health laws, and campaign finance laws are subject to being overturned. And if money is speech, it means corporations and the wealthy can spend unlimited amounts of money in independent expenditures to influence our elections. And we've gotten to the point that our elections are now auctions, right? So taking the two of these together, it's corroding the very idea that we could have a democratic republic. And that's the reason that both principled conservatives and principled liberals alike actually are in support of the Move to Amend approach.
There are conservatives that are of this, really?
Yeah, in fact, we have a member of Congress who is actually a Republican. You remember the Freedom Fries during the Iraq War, right? That was Representative Walt Jones from North Carolina, a Tea Party Republican, somebody that I probably disagree on most policy issues. However, he is a sponsor of the We the People Amendment being lifted up by Move to Amend, because he says, I disagree with most of these people, the progressives, on most of their policies, but I agree with them that corporations don't have constitutional rights. I agree with them of the corrosive influence of money in elections. I agree with them on the need to overturn Citizens United. So it's an interesting opportunity for us to talk to principled conservatives with whom we have some profound disagreements on other policy issues about the principle of self-government and about the need to abolish corporate constitutional rights and money as speech.
Where do you stand on the idea of small government?
Listen, what I say is this: big government is not better. Small government is not better. only better government is better. And it's really important to recognize that it depends on what you're talking about. If we're talking about a healthcare system, I believe in a single payer hybrid system, a national, quote, big government payment process, but you allow states to create whatever process will actually be the best version of that single payer system. If you're talking about the national defense, I believe in big government completely. There is like when it comes to issues of the national defense, the national federal government is the right place to do that. If you're talking about environmental protections, I say we need a hybrid. The national government should set the limits, right? The floor under which no local or state can agree to any lower environmental standards, but local or state governments could set even higher standards for water quality or air quality or forest defense.
What we have now is the conservatives and some of the corporations using federal regulations to prevent states from setting higher standards. For example, labeling foods as GMO or not. They've made that against the law, which is just another despicable.
It's disgusting, and it's disgusting and unprincipled, because these people out of one corner of their mouth will say, we will forbid local communities or counties or states to label GMOs or to have federal environmental protections. And then on the other side of their mouth, they'll call for limiting the federal government, and they call for states' rights, and Ronald Reagan called for the new federalism. They're not principled. And this is the point. And I want to conclude with this because I think it's really important. I know that as a progressive, you and I share principles, values, strategies. We want to get to the same place. I'll tell you this. With principled conservatives, we might have disagreement on policy issues, but the principle of self-government we probably agree with. And I want to make this observation, Rob. I think principled liberals and progressives have been lied to and sold out by the ruling elite of the Democratic Party, who are taking their money and their marching orders from Wall Street America, the big national banks, and corporate America. And now I want to make a corollary observation. Principled conservatives have been lied to and sold out by the ruling elite of the Republican Party, who are taking their money and their marching orders from basically the same damned corporations, big banks, and Wall Street America. So if we recognize that there is actually a con game being played by the leadership of the Democratic and the Republican parties, we can realize that we should engage in fierce, rigorous debate between ideologies of conservatives and progressives. We should engage in that process, but we should recognize that most of the fights that us on the ground are having are actually designed to prevent us from realizing our commonality. Because
we got 2 minutes left. What actions? What would you like?
I want to invite people once again. I want to invite people to investigate the Green Party. www.gp.org. Find your local and state Green Party and just check it out. See if you're interested in it. Number 2, I want to refer you again to the Democracy Convention, www.democracyconvention.org, August 2 through 6 in Minneapolis. Even if you can't get there, sign up so you can know about the live streaming. Third, I want to direct you to jill2016.com to learn more about the recount. And fourth, I want to direct you to movetoamend.org to find out about that campaign. And lastly, I want to refer you to OpEdNews, not to be sycophantic to you, Rob, but I really appreciate the fact that this is a place where we can get non-corporately filtered news, information, and analysis and try to figure out just what the hell is going on.
Thanks. And we're going to wrap. This has been the Rob Kall Bottom Up Show. It's on Progressive Radio Network. It's on iTunes. It's on Stitcher. It's on YouTube. And I've been speaking with David Cobb. great interview. Thanks a lot, David.
Thanks, Rob.